Hey, welcome back to IR Insight Live. I'm your host, Will Briganti. We're here at the 2018 NERI Annual Conference at the Wynn Las Vegas. Joining me as my guest today is Dan Ramito. He's Global Head of Investor Relations. Global Head of Investor Analytics.
It's been a long week so far.
I'm saying Investor Relations a lot.
Yep.
Global Head of Investor Analytics at Nasdaq. Dan, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Good to have you back on. So you just finished a panel. Talk to our audience a bit about the topics that you were discussing.
Sure. The panel essentially highlighted the convergence between ESG, index investors, and the activist mindset. I think a lot of IROs, especially in the States, are wrapping their heads around to how to think of ESG. About 2 years ago, it was more of a topic of conversation, and now it's more of a focal point. So really wrapping their heads on what is this ESG framework, and how does that relate with my business, particularly understanding that now this convergence, as I said before, between activism, long-only, index, and ESG.
So obviously, folks that are in the industry are seeing a lot of statistics out there that in the next 5 to 10 years, 50% of institutional ownership will be in passive.
Right.
That's right. So they've seen all this data. What do they need to do to get ready?
Right.
How do they need to be engaging with investors on this?
Yeah, I think it's a two-part answer, right? First and foremost, you have to understand that quote-unquote passive is not necessarily indicative of how the index manager goes about their business.
Right.
Just because you're an index manager doesn't necessarily mean that there's not an active component to that. The rules that dictate buying and selling might be quote-unquote passive, but the risk management in between is very much active. So understanding on how to engage an index investor, which is almost entirely different than engaging a traditional long-only. Index investors have, with a 50% exposure to any stock, right? There's an inherent vulnerability that they now have because with such concentrated positions and the inability to sell, if a certain risk catalyst or some sort of component or element of risk is on the horizon that management's not properly preparing for, or perceived to be properly preparing for, the index investor, purely as a fiduciary, has to take action on that.
So how does your team go in and help investor relations groups? So talk to us a little bit about that.
So a lot of it is education, right? It's a progression. It starts with the education, almost not necessarily to the point of evangelizing ESG, but educating on how to think about it, right? It's very broad, it's somewhat ambiguous. There's a lot of avenues that you could go down in the ESG framework. So we set out to educate clients on how to prioritize the various components of ESG. From there, we do emphasize engagement with a particular index fund within the context of ESG. So what does a particular index fund look like? What are the rules? How do they vote? What are the particular contexts that I should reach out to? I think one of the biggest things that IROs are learning is that I do have to engage on a consistent basis with my particular index holding. And then from there, measuring that outreach. So not necessarily saying do it, assessing how often and the efficiency of frequency of reach out.
Great. All right, terrific insight, Dan. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
All right. This is Dan Ramito. He's Global Head of Investor Analytics here at Nasdaq. You've been watching IR Insight live from the 2018 NERI Annual Conference at the Wynn Las Vegas. Thanks so much for tuning in.